Imagine you're 9 years old. You think someone is finally taking you out for your birthday, and instead, you're drugged, buried underground in a tiny concrete bunker, and the only thing separating you from death is a small plastic tube sticking through the dirt. Today's story sounds like a horror movie. Unfortunately, it really happened. Hey besties, welcome back to Thick Thighs and Murder Vibes. I'm your host, Tara, and I'm glad you're here. Whether you're cleaning the house, pretending to work, driving to work, or hiding in your pantry eating snacks so your family doesn't ask you to share with them, welcome. If this is your first episode, thank you for giving this little podcast a chance. Around here, we cover true crime with respect to the victims, zero respect for the monsters, and just enough sarcasm to keep ourselves emotionally stable. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you're listening, leave a 5-star review if you think I deserve it, and tell your true crime bestie about the show. It really does help more than people realize. All right, grab your coffee, your energy drink, your emotional support blanket, whatever gets you through a story like today's, because this one is heartbreaking. It's infuriating and somehow unbelievably hopeful. Now, before we dive into this absolute nightmare of a case, I need you to picture something with me. It's 1992, Long Island, New York, suburban America, white picket fences, minivans, the whole deal. And somewhere in Bay Shore, there's a little girl walking around in the middle of winter with no coat. Her name is Katie Beers, and she's 9 years old. And here's the thing that's going to make you want to throw something. Everyone saw her. Neighbors saw her. Teachers saw her. Other parents saw her. This wasn't some hidden, locked away situation. Katie was out there, visible, walking the streets, going to school, existing in plain sight. And nobody did a goddamn thing. Because Katie Beers was the kind of kid people looked through. The kind of kid who fell through every single crack in every single system designed to protect children. And by the time anyone actually noticed Katie, really noticed her, it was because she'd been kidnapped and locked in a coffin-sized underground bunker for over 2 weeks. But here's the twist that's going to make your brain short-circuit. Katie herself has said that being kidnapped was the best thing that ever happened to her. I know. Sit with that for a second. This is the story of how a 9-year-old girl survived 17 days chained in an underground vault, watching police search for her on a TV screen while her captor sexually assaulted her. It's the story of how she used her own emotional intelligence to befriend a monster just to stay alive. And it's the story of how sometimes, and I hate that this is true, the worst thing that can happen to you is also the thing that saves you. So buckle up, because we are going deep into one of the most disturbing cases to come out of 1990s New York. And I'm not going to sugarcoat any of it. Let's start with Katie's life before the kidnapping, because if we don't understand where she came from, the rest of this story won't make sense. And I'm warning you now, this part is rough, because Katie Beers didn't just have a bad childhood. She had the kind of childhood that should have triggered every alarm bell in every system we have. Katie was born on December 30th, 1982. to a woman named Marilyn Beers. And Marilyn was, I'm trying to be fair here, but Marilyn, she was a disaster. She was neglectful, emotionally absent, and seemed fundamentally uninterested in the basic concept of parenting. Katie lived with Marilyn and her older half-brother John in a house that can only be described as a health code violation with a roof. We're talking roach-infested, filthy. We're talking rusted cars and an old refrigerator just chilling on the front lawn like some kind of suburban art installation. Neighbors described it as the house everyone avoided, the eyesore, the place where you knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to get involved. And Katie, she was just there, wandering around the neighborhood, no winter coat in the middle of a New York winter, clearly neglected, clearly in need of help. And everyone just kept walking. But it gets worse, because Marilyn wasn't just neglectful. She was also perfectly happy to hand Katie off to other people whenever it was convenient. And one of those people was Katie's godmother, a woman named Linda Guillory. Now, on paper, this might sound like a good thing, right? Like, okay, bio mom is a mess, but at least godmother is stepping up. At least someone is taking care of this kid. Except Linda was married to a man named Sal, and Sal was a child rapist. I'm not going to dance around this. Sal sexually abused Katie starting when she was a toddler. We're talking about a man who raped a child so young she couldn't even articulate what was happening to her. And it didn't happen once. It happened repeatedly for years. Katie has spoken publicly about this abuse as an adult, and the details are absolutely gutting. Sal would molest her, rape her, violate her in ways that no child should ever experience. And because Katie was so young when it started, she didn't even have the framework to understand that what was happening to her was wrong. It was just her life. It was her normal. And Linda, the godmother, the woman who was supposed to be protecting Katie, she either didn't know, didn't care, or didn't want to know. Take your pick, because none of the options are good. So let's take stock here. Katie Beers is a little girl living in squalor with a neglectful mother, being sexually abused by her godmother's husband, and walking around her neighborhood like a ghost child that nobody wants to see. And we haven't even gotten to John Esposito yet. So enter John. John Esposito, 43, lives with his elderly mother in Bayshore, by all accounts a mama's boy. He's quiet, unassuming, the kind of guy his neighbors would describe as nice or harmless. You know where this is going. John Esposito was a family friend. He knew the Beers family, he knew Katie, and he seemed like one of the only adults in Katie's life who actually paid attention to her. And before I tell you what happened next, I want to take a quick detour because this part is really important. In society, we have this idea that stranger danger is the biggest threat to kids, but statistically, children are far more likely to be harmed by someone they already know, whether it's family, friends, neighbors, someone who's already been invited into their life. That's what makes these cases so terrifying. John Esposito wasn't a stranger. He was somebody Katie knew, someone who had spent time around her family, someone who slowly earned her trust. That's how grooming works. It isn't usually dramatic, it's patient, it's calculated, and it's someone figuring out exactly what a child needs emotionally and pretending to be the person who can provide it. Whether that's attention, gifts, compliments, or simply making a child feel important, predators are experts at making children believe they're safe. Every time I hear someone say, "Well, he seemed like such a nice guy." Yeah, that's usually the point. Nobody introduces themselves as, "Hi, I'm John. I'm terrible. Nice to meet you." And that's exactly what John Esposito did. He didn't look dangerous. He looked helpful and he looked generous. He was grooming them Because here's what nobody knew at the time, or at least what nobody wanted to acknowledge. John Esposito was also sexually abusing Katie's half-brother, John Beers, for years, the same way Sal was abusing Katie. So let's just pause and appreciate the absolute horror show that was Katie Beers' childhood. She's got her godmother's husband raping her. She's got her mother's friend raping her brother. She's living in a house that's falling apart. She's got no winter coat. She's 9 years old. And nobody is helping her but Esposito. Esposito was playing a long game because while he was abusing Katie's brother, he was also planning something much, much worse for Katie herself. He was building a dungeon. And I'm not being dramatic. I'm not exaggerating. John Esposito literally constructed an underground bunker beneath his house, a hidden, coffin-sized concrete vault with a hatch that could be sealed with a 200-pound weight. He soundproofed it, put in a TV, he stocked it with supplies, and he did all of this with one goal in mind: to kidnap Katie and keep her there for the rest of her life. Let me say that again because it's important. John Esposito didn't plan to kidnap Katie for a few days or a few weeks or even a few months. He planned to keep her forever. He was going to lock her in that bunker, seal the hatch, and make her disappear from the world. He even told Katie, once he had her down there, that he was going to take a photo of her asleep and send it to police so they'd think she was dead. This man spent months, possibly years, planning all of this, building it, preparing for the day he would make a 9-year-old girl vanish. And the worst part, he almost got away with it. So it is December 28th, 1992, 2 days before Katie's 10th birthday. Katie had never had a real birthday party, never had any moment where a room full of people sings to her and she blows out candles and feels even for a second like she matters. Her birthday again was December 30th, and it's looking like this year is going to be the same as every other year. Nothing. But then John Esposito makes her an offer. He's going to take her to Spaceplex. It's a big arcade in Bay Shore. It's going to be fun, special, and it's just for her. And Katie, because she's 9 years old and because Esposito is one of the only adults who's ever been nice to her, she says yes. So they go to Spaceplex. And this is where the story gets its hook in you, because Katie later described this moment in an interview, and the way she tells it is so matter of fact, it'll break your heart. She said, quote, "He kissed me and then threw me down the cubbyhole." That's it. That's how it happened. 1 minute, Katie's at an arcade. The next minute, she's being shoved into a hole in the ground in John Esposito's house, and a 200-pound concrete slab is slamming down on top of the hatch, sealing her inside. And just like that, Katie Beers disappears. Deep breath, because this is where we get into the truly horrific details of what Katie endured. And I'm not going to skim over it because Katie herself has been incredibly brave in talking about what happened to her. She deserves to have her story told accurately. The bunker was small. We're talking coffin-sized, about 6 feet long, maybe 4 feet wide, fully concreted walls, concrete floor. There's a hatch above her head that she couldn't reach. She couldn't open it. She couldn't escape. There was also a TV. Esposito had installed a TV in the bunker, and he would turn it on so Katie could watch the news, so she could watch the police searching for her, and so she could see her own face on the screen, see the press conferences, see people talking about the missing girl. Could you imagine that? You're 9 years old, you're locked in a box, underground, and you're watching the world look for you while you're right there, just a few feet below the surface, screaming, and nobody can hear you. Esposito chained her. He kept her restrained so she couldn't move freely, even within that tiny space. He controlled when she ate, when she slept, and when she could use the bathroom. He had total, absolute power over her, and he raped her. I'm going to say that clearly because it's important. John Esposito sexually assaulted Katie Beers repeatedly during the 16 days she was in that bunker. He violated her in that tiny, dark, underground prison while she was chained and helpless and terrified. Katie has said she barely slept during those 17 days. How could she? She was in constant fear, constant pain. She didn't know if she was going to live or die. She didn't know if anyone was even looking for her or if Esposito's plan to make everyone think she was dead had worked. But here's the thing about Katie that's going to absolutely wreck you. She didn't give up. Even at 9 years old, even in the worst circumstances imaginable, Katie figured out that her survival depended on making Esposito believe she was okay with what was happening, that she wasn't going to fight him, that she was, in some twisted way, on his side. She befriended her rapist to stay alive, and it worked. So, while Katie is underground, chained in a box, being assaulted by a monster, what are police doing? Well, they're investigating her family, because of course they are. And look, I'm not saying the police were wrong to look at Katie's family. Her home life was a disaster. Her mother was neglectful. There were reports of abuse. When a child goes missing, you absolutely investigate the people closest to them. But here's the problem. The police got so focused on the family drama, on Marilyn Beers and Linda and their conflicting stories and their obvious dysfunction, that they didn't pay enough attention to John Esposito. And John Esposito was right there. He was the last person to see Katie. He was the one who reported her missing. He was the family friend who's been spending time with Katie and her brother. And, oh, by the way, he was actively sexually abusing Katie's brother, which you'd think might be a red flag worth investigating. But Esposito played it perfectly. He was cooperative. He was concerned. He was just a nice guy trying to help find this poor missing girl, and the police bought it. Meanwhile, Katie managed to do something extraordinary. At some point early in her captivity, Esposito let her make a phone call. Maybe he thought it would throw off the investigation. Maybe he wanted to taunt people. I don't know. But Katie called her godmother's house and left a message on the answering machine. She left 4 words. "I been kidnapped." That's it. 4 words from a 9-year-old girl that should have changed everything. It did trigger a massive response. The case went national. There were press conferences, there were searches, there was a media frenzy. But even with that message, even with Katie literally telling people she'd been kidnapped, the investigation kept circling back to the family. Was this a custody dispute? Was someone in the family hiding her? Was this some kind of twisted arrangement? And all the while, John Esposito was in his house, watching the news coverage, watching police search for Katie, knowing she was right beneath his feet. Let's talk about Katie's survival strategy, because this is where you really see how extraordinary this kid was. Katie figured out pretty quickly that fighting Esposito wasn't going to work. She was 9, and he was a grown man. She was chained in a box. She had no leverage, no power, no way to physically overcome him. So, she used psychology instead. Katie started talking to Esposito. She asked him questions. She acted interested in him, made him feel like she understood him, like she wasn't judging him, like maybe in some sick, twisted way, they had a connection. She played the long game. And Esposito, because he was a narcissist predator who generally believed his own bullshit, fell for it. He started to see Katie not as a victim he'd kidnapped, but as someone who was choosing to be there with him, someone who cared about him. Katie has talked about this in interviews, and the way she describes it is both brilliant and heartbreaking. She knew that if Esposito saw her as a person, as someone he had a relationship with, he'd be less likely to kill her. She knew that if she could make him believe she was okay, he might let his guard down. And she was right. This 9-year-old girl, locked in an underground prison, being raped and tortured, managed to manipulate her captor into seeing her as something other than disposable. She earned small mercies. She stayed alive. But it came at a cost. Because even though Katie's strategy worked, even though it kept her breathing, she had to do things no child should ever have to do. She had to smile at her rapist. She had to pretend she wasn't terrified. She had to bury her own trauma so deep that she could perform normalcy for a monster. And that's the thing about survival that people don't always understand. Sometimes surviving means doing things that feel impossible. Sometimes it means sacrificing pieces of yourself just to make it to tomorrow. And Katie did that. At 9 years old, she did that. 17 days after Katie disappeared, John Esposito broke. I don't know exactly what happened in his head. Maybe the pressure got to him. Maybe he realized he couldn't keep this up forever. Maybe, just maybe, some tiny, shriveled part of his conscience finally woke up. But on January 13th, 1993, Esposito called his lawyer and he confessed. He told them he had Katie, he told them where she was, and he told them she was alive. Of course, police race to his house. They find the hatch. They lift the 200-pound weight. They open the door to the bunker, and there was Katie, alive, chained, filthy, traumatized beyond measure, but alive. The photos from her rescue are hard to look at. Katie's face is pale. Her eyes are huge. She looked like she's been through a war because she was. She's been underground for over 2 weeks. She's been assaulted. She's been starved. And she's been psychologically tortured. And the moment she came out of that bunker, the moment she saw daylight again, Katie Beers' life changed forever. Katie's rescued, and you'd think that's the end of the story, right? Girl gets saved, bad guy goes to jail, everyone lives happily ever after. Except this is real life, and real life is messier than that. Because once Katie was safe, once she was in the hospital being examined and cared for, the full scope of her abuse came to light. Doctors found evidence of long-term sexual abuse, not just from Esposito, from before Esposito. And Katie, she started talking. She told investigators about Sal, about the years of rape and molestation, about how her godmother's husband had been abusing her since she was a toddler. And suddenly, this wasn't just a kidnapping case anymore. This was a case about a little girl who'd been failed by every single adult in her life. A little girl who's been abused by multiple predators, and nobody had noticed. Nobody had stopped it. Sal was arrested. John Espinito was arrested. Both men were charged, tried, and convicted. Esposito got 15 years to life. He died in prison at Sing Sing in 2022, shortly after a parole hearing. Natural causes, apparently. I'm not going to pretend I'm sad about that. Sal also faced charges and was convicted. He's also dead now. Again, not shedding any tears. But here's the thing that's going to make you want to scream. These men got to live for decades after what they did to Katie. They got to breathe air, eat food, exist in a world. Meanwhile, Katie had to spend years in therapy working through trauma that should have never happened to her in the first place. The justice system didn't fail Katie because it didn't convict her abusers. It failed her because it let the abuse happen at all. Here's where we get to the part of the story that's going to make your brain do backflips. Katie Beers has said publicly and repeatedly that being kidnapped was the best thing that ever happened to her. And I know, it sounds insane. It sounds like trauma talking, like Stockholm Syndrome, like something that can't possibly be true. But it is true. And here's why. When Katie was rescued from that bunker, she didn't go back to her mother. She didn't go back to her godmother's house. She went into foster care. And her family, her foster family, was a couple in East Hampton. And they gave her something she'd never had before. They gave her a real childhood. They gave her birthday parties. They gave her a safe home. They gave her love, stability, structure. And they gave her the chance to be a kid, to play, to go to school without worrying about who was going to hurt her when she got home. Katie has said that if she hadn't been kidnapped, she would have stayed in that cycle of abuse. She would have kept being passed between her mother and her godmother. She would have kept being raped by Sal. She would have kept being neglected, overlooked, and invisible. The kidnapping, as horrific as it was the thing that finally made people see her. It was the thing that got her out. And I hate that this is true. I hate that a 9-year-old girl had to be locked in an underground prison and assaulted for 17 days before anyone gave enough of a shit to actually help her. But that's what happened. Katie's foster parents eventually adopted her. She grew up in East Hampton. She went to college. She got married. She had 2 kids of her own. And in 2013, she published a memoir called Buried Memories, where she told her story in her own words. Today, Katie Beers is in her 40s. She's a wife, a mother, a survivor, an advocate. She's spoken on national television about her experiences. She's used her story to help other survivors of abuse, and she's happy. She is actually genuinely happy, which is maybe the most extraordinary part of this whole story. So let's talk about what this case really tells us, because it's not just a story about one girl and one kidnapping. It's a story about systems that fail, about adults who look the other way, and about how easy it is for a child to become invisible. Katie was abused by multiple men for years. She lived in squalor. She walked around her neighborhood with no coat in the middle of winter. She was clearly, obviously, in need of help. And nobody helped her. Not her teachers, not her neighbors, not even Child Protective Services. The police didn't help until it was almost too late. John Esposito was abusing Katie's brother for years, and nobody stopped him. He built an underground dungeon in his house, and nobody noticed. He kidnapped a 9-year-old girl, and the investigation initially focused on everyone except for him. The system didn't just fail Katie once. It failed her over and over and over again. And the only reason Katie survived, the only reason she's alive and thriving today, is because of her own extraordinary resilience. Because she was smart enough, strong enough, brave enough to do whatever it took to stay alive. But here's the thing. Katie shouldn't have had to be that strong. No 9-year-old should have to outsmart a rapist to survive. No child should have to befriend their abuser just to make it through another day. Katie survived in spite of the system, not because of it. And that's what makes this case so infuriating, because Katie's story has a happy ending. She got out. She got help. She built a good life. But it didn't have to be this hard. It didn't have to take a kidnapping for someone to notice that this little girl needed help. So yeah, Katie Beers is a survivor. She's a warrior. She's proof that the human spirit can endure unimaginable horror and still come out the other side. And she's also a reminder of how badly we fail our most vulnerable. And we need to do better. Katie doesn't have contact with her biological mother or brother anymore. She's close with her adoptive family. She's raising her own kids with the kind of love and attention she never got as a child. Both of her abusers are dead. John Esposito died in prison in 2022. Sal is also deceased. And Katie, she's living her best life. She's got the family she's always wanted. She's got the safety she's always deserved. And if there's any justice in this world, it's that Katie Beers got to win in the end. She survived, she thrived, and she got out. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for another episode of Thick Thighs and Murder Vibes. If today's episode moved you, taught you something, or made you yell at your steering wheel because John Esposito is absolute garbage, make sure you follow the show and leave a review. You can also find me on social media. I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's case. Until next time, lock your doors, trust your instincts, and remember, not every monster looks like one. I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye. Bye.